Okay, we're just going to wait a couple minutes and then we'll get started. My name is Jeff Waldman, founder of ScaleHR, and joined by Euan Cameron, who's the co-founder of Willo, and so we're going to get started soon. That's one. Welcome everybody here. If you want to, please chime in to the chat. Just let us know where you're chiming in from, so what cities. So we have people, from all over the world, registered for this, which is great. Because this is a global topic, so this isn't going to be different from country to country. So hopefully the chat is working. Anita, you're in Toronto. Welcome. You're not in Paris today? No, I guess not. You're in Toronto. Okay, just give it a couple more minutes, and then we'll get started. So I want to thank everybody for being here. We're going to spend the next hour together, and then just give it another minute. I'll let you give it a minute, and then we'll get people, and then we'll get started. All right. Toronto, Mississauga, which is basically Toronto. For those of you who don't know where it is, Mississauga is. Most of it is in Toronto. Oh, excellent. Oh, let's just go. Okay. All right. So my name is Jeff Waldman, founder of ScaleHR. Just want to welcome everyone to the first webinar that we're going to be having this year. We've got a whole bunch coming in the next while. This is the first one of probably close to 10 to 15 that we're going to do this year. And so if you want to find out where all the other ones are, just go to ScaleHR.com/event, and then you'll see them. And then obviously Euan Cameron, who's the co-founder of Willo. It's a fantastic platform. It's a hiring a screening platform, actually. So if you haven't heard of them, you can go to Willo, look now, an OWR on the end, .video, and we'll be sharing, all of the assets in the webinar, shortly, after, probably tomorrow. And so ScaleHR, for those of you, who don't know, we are a company that has started working with emerging HR tech companies across the world, brand awareness and lead gen, leveraging our deep background in HR, leadership, and technology. We have a brand new website, go ScaleHR.com, and that we're really proud of. Finally launched it, and that's available to everyone. And then I just want to welcome Euan Cameron. Euan, maybe you want to just chime in, just give us a little bit of an overview of what you do and what your company is about.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening. Willo is a candidate screening platform, and we were built to help folks like you hire at scale. And we help cut through the noise, cut through the application noise, get clearer signals, and identify and uncover those real candidates so that you can hire faster, you can reduce admin, and you can make fairer, better decisions without, importantly, losing that human touch. And that's why I think this topic today is really interesting, the whole AI topic. And obviously, how do we keep the human in the loop? How do we keep the human touch when it comes to hiring?
Fantastic. So thanks for that, Euan. So just want to housekeeping. So we are going to be recording the webinar. We'll send out the recording tomorrow. And then we're also going to be producing some content out of this as well. In the next little bit on this topic also. So there are two features here in the chat. So if you want to share your thoughts and comments in the chat, there are the Q&A features. So if you have a question, drop them into the Q&A, and we have a session towards the end for Q&A. And then these slides, we'll also be sharing them as well in the email tomorrow. And then that's again the post webinar reach out and content. So there's going to be some stuff coming out in the next little bit. Yeah, so I want to thank you all for being here. If some of you know me, I know that we don't typically do things the traditional way. So this session, while it's called a webinar, it's more about being practical, site-led, and then experience-based. This is not a product demo. This is not a future of AI talk, okay? And it's not a silver bullet solution. So we try to really educate people and inspire with some new ideas and so forth. And so just want to promise everybody that that's what we're going to be doing here. So you should be feeling comfortable and engaging. So please share thoughts. This is about all of you as well. Okay. So why now? Why now? Well, there's been a huge shift, obviously, with AI coming into the fold. I think what's really happened here, before we get into solutions and frameworks, I think it's really important to talk about the framing of this challenge and problem. So most hiring teams, I would argue, that aren't really struggling because they're bad at hiring. I think what's happened is they're struggling because the actual environment has changed faster, and they change faster than the tools can handle. And I would also say that the application volume has sort of exploded. And I think it's been trending upward, for a while now. But I think now with AI, it's kind of gone through the roof. And so I think it's probably driven by AI generated resume application, just making it easier. So you're seeing a lot of that going on. But I think the other thing too, which is called signal clarity, which might be a new term for some. But what that really is the signal clarity, gone down. So the signal, usually when it comes to hiring, is the actual resume, right? So that's the first thing that typically comes through application and resume. And so what happens is so when you have more applications, more data, and more activity, but less confidence, and that's really what's going on here. So when you have less confidence, then it starts to show up as a fatigue. The recruiters are spending more time looking at resumes, reviewing, assessing, screening, second guessing, not because they're slow, but because it's harder to know what to track. So when we talk about CVs, resumes stopping working, it's not about they're suddenly broken. We're saying the conditions that they were built for no longer exist. That's a key point there. And so that's really the context for today's session. It's not about panic, not hype, but it's a real shift in how hiring signals behave. And obviously, like an AI-driven market. And so with that context set, I really want to talk about what the real problem, actually is. And so let's go to a poll. Just launch a poll. Okay, just give me 1 second. Poll. So here it is. This is the first question. What is your biggest hiring challenge right now? And I hope you can see the poll. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see it. You cannot. Some people can. Well, some people can, some can't. Jillian, I can't help you. I don't know what's going on. Okay, cool. You cannot. It pops up. It's still there? Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. So, yeah, click on the purple icon at the top right. Okay, that's weird. I should have popped up. But anyway, you see, technology is a beautiful thing when it works, right? So, all of us together in this long tech journey to try to get things to work. All right, so thank you very much. Let me just see what the poll was. All right, so we've got 14 votes. Thank you for voting. It seems like a split. 5, hard to assess, real capability. So that seems to be the most popular one, which seems logical. Too many applications, and then, also all of, the above. Thank you for that, everybody. I was kind of guessing that it would be hard to assess the capability, but would be the primary challenge, which is what came out. So thank you for that. Just want to dive into the real problem. So we set the context here of what we're dealing with, and I think it's important to really dive into the problem. And so I want to just turn it over to Euan.
Yeah, thanks. It's a really interesting topic. I mean, we're looking at the age-old thing that we hear from hiring managers: more applications, please. More applications equals success. If we don't have enough applications, then what are we doing? And obviously, that's not really the case anymore. It never was the case. But I think today, more so than ever, it's not the case. Volumes are through the roof. As a platform, we're seeing application volumes almost 3x what they were 2 years ago across our customer base, which is insane. So the volume of applications indexing in just 2-3 years. And a large part of that is obviously to do with AI. And the other part of it is to do with the job boards themselves. Job boards themselves are making it easier than ever to submit applications. So on the surface of it, if you were a hiring manager, you would think lots of applications, lots of volume, amazing. We must have so many candidates to choose from. And then the harsh reality of it is all these candidates are starting to look the same because they're using AI. And therefore, we can see on the screen here, confidence falls quite dramatically. Confidence in that large pool of that volume of candidates is falling. And it's falling because exactly what we saw in the poll there, that the signals just aren't there. We're taking, on average 200-300 applicants. We're looking at them, and we can no longer say on the surface of it, this is the top 10% worth spending time on, because 50% plus of those candidates look the same, and they all look like they could be good choices because they've all used some AI, and they've all, used right keywords and the right terminology, so that actually on the surface of it looks okay. And then the kind of most challenging part is our teams are having to put in more effort than ever before to handle that volume and to try and get to that top 10% of candidates that are actually worth investing and spending time on. For me, it's more like a perfect storm, Jeff, that we've got this year with these three things all happening to us over the past few years. It's not like it's a new phenomenon. I would say the volume piece in particular, we started to see increasing volumes from 2024 onwards. So volumes started to increase 2024. 2025, the confidence started to fall because we reached a tipping point where there was too much volume. And then 2025, 2026, everyone starts to feel the pain of that. And that's really that's what I'm seeing, and that's what we're hearing as well. Yeah, I mean, I guess this next slide, it sort of highlights the problems with hiring in general. Like, for obviously years, many of us have been saying hiring is broken, and many of us have been saying hiring is broken because of the CV or the resume, right? The whole underpinning of hiring was around the CV or the resume. That was where we got our signals from. That was where we got our volume from. That was how we made decisions. That's how we progressed people to the next stage. That's what we were screening, and that's what we were scanning, or we were keyword scanning if we had an ATS that did that. And then obviously AI came along, and candidates started to realize, hey, we have AI. And then on the flip side, employers also, like us, started to realize, hey, we have AI too. Everyone ended up using AI. If you want to like really just generalize, everyone started to use AI. And then we have this picture on the screen here that obviously polished applications can come out of AI all day long, and you can also generate them really quickly. But are we looking at qualified people when we look at AI generated applications? Of course we're not. We're just looking at people that have used tools, and they might have used the tools well, but it doesn't mean that they're the right fit for our organization or worth spending time on. And then the other piece is, yeah, like the speed and the accuracy piece. I guess the unusual thing about AI in general, because it's all very new to a lot of us still, we can do a lot really quickly with AI. I could build a website, or I could generate, a blog in a few seconds, but it doesn't mean it's right. And I have to read the whole thing if I want to make sure it's right. And it doesn't mean it's correct. And it doesn't mean it's factual either. And if you're doing that with a resume or a CV, then the same results happen. It doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it reflects you. It doesn't mean it's accurate. When you throw all of that into the mix, come back to the previous slide, it just creates this perfect storm where we really don't know what we're dealing with here. We've got huge volumes. We don't really know what we're looking at within that volume or that pool. And then our teams are stretched to the max, trying to make any sense of it at all. And that's tough. Like, that is a challenge that we're talking and seeing today in January 2026. And then, yeah, I guess the sort of I guess it's what we've had forever, right? The CV is what we sort of underpin hiring on. This is the start. This is the currency. If you look at hiring in any country in the world, it's actually quite amazing because there isn't many things like this. But hiring across the globe starts with the CV. It's the currency, the universal currency. If you post a job online or physically in a store, the first thing that businesses typically look for is a CV. And that's universal across the globe. But it doesn't mean that it's right. And you can see on the screen here why the CV isn't right anymore. It never was, but I think it's worse than ever. The CV is optimized for presentation of things that you did in the past. It's typically optimized with all the keywords, and it's self-reported. It's just me saying, what I did and in my words, how it went. It's not obviously optimized for any of the things on the right here. We're not getting authentic signals from a CV. Even if it was written by a third party for me, that third party only writes what I tell them. So how can it be authentic? It's not actually using any third party sources of data. It's just my word. It's difficult to assess behaviors as well, right? The things that I write in my CV are just the things that I did. It doesn't tell you the full picture. You don't really know what I didn't do or what I may have done. And then it's really difficult to make any judgments again on a CV. It's only one person's view or one person's take, and it's written in a certain way by that person to achieve a goal, typically to get a job, like a sales pitch. And there's lots of things that are typically going to be left out of a sales pitch, things you don't want to get into, the kind of messier stuff. There might be some ambiguity in there if you don't want to go into the detail too much. So the CVs themselves, that universal currency that we see still around the globe being used as the first point to get access to employment, is fairly, as we discussed there on the left, fairly problematic.
Okay. So this one here, I really want to like obviously, like as we were talking about, there is a hidden cost here, and I think we're talking about signals, like low quality signals. So there's some of the costs, obviously. And I'm just wondering, in your experience, can you share an example, maybe one primary example? These costs show up. Based on the work that you've done with Willo, can you articulate maybe one example?
So we're fortunate, Jeff. We have customers in over 100 countries, and we've had customers in over 100 countries for 5 years now. And the cool thing about that is that we get a really good insight into how hiring is done globally. And biggest area that I see these low quality signals, being a cost in the organization is in the interview fatigue phase. The candidates are typically coming in these high volumes, and because we can't make a huge amount of sense of these CVs, a lot of organizations spend a lot of time interviewing. So they take a large volume and they just start interviewing, and they'll interview back to back every single day. There's one organization in particular, I remember 3 years ago, they came to us with a challenge and they said, we have 15 interviewers, basically 15 recruiters that interview 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And you don't need to do the maths on that to know that it's a lot of interviewing. There's a lot of time just spent, and it was all done on Zoom as well. So this was like 15 people sitting in an office on Zoom 8 hours a day, just getting through the volume, just crunching through the volume of applicants to try and sift through, because they couldn't make sense from these CVs. Huge amounts of fatigue, huge amounts of effort. Obviously with 15 people as well, you don't have that consistency, because every single person, every one of those 15 has a slightly different approach to interviewing, probably asking slightly different questions. They're getting tired at different points throughout the day. And it's a really big cost, which can be hidden. And it's a result of these low quality signals. I find it's a really fascinating area, because we don't really ever see it that often. We tend to sort of think in our minds, interviews, good. If we're doing lots of interviews, that must be a good thing. But, for example, in that customer situation, it wasn't a good thing. They had too many interviews. They couldn't even make sense of the volumes. They needed a stage before that. They needed something to take all of these applicants and just help them narrow that funnel down. Like, how do we crunch through and actually find the candidates worth spending that time on, the ones that are actually going to progress?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think, we just got a question about a solution. So we're actually getting to that part. So there's a couple more slides here that frame the problem. And then we're going to dive right into the actual model that we're going to be presenting. And so, I just want to just have you all sit with this statement here. So hiring is not a speed problem, you could say. It's more of a signal problem. And I don't think that this has been an issue just in the last couple of years. I think it's been trending upward like this for some time. I think AI has just covered it to be a major problem. So I just want you to just think about that. I think the real goal here in any hiring situation is confidence, and it's not so much velocity or speed, but it's confidence there. And I think we're at a point now where we need to change to rethink how we can go about that. And so that's what we're going to do today. And then I think we also just want to pass it over to Euan, but we kind of mentioned what signal quality mean. I know that, and I mentioned earlier that it might be a new term for some. So maybe you just want to just sort of clear the air on that first, and then we'll get into some of the other stuff.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's start with the signals. What are the signals in hiring? Typically, your signals in hiring were looking at the CV, going through the CV and looking for things like where they mentioned skills, where they mentioned degrees that they might hold, where they mentioned, challenges or problems that they overcame. Those are the traditional signals. We're probably also looking for bias signals. So things like what universities or colleges people might have gone to, where they're located. Those are maybe some of the unconscious bias signals, but signals in general were typically coming from the CV to start with. And when we look at signal quality, what we're saying is, are those the right signals? And obviously, a lot of those, as we discussed earlier, coming from the CV, weren't the right signals in the first place. Signals, and they did a job, but they weren't necessarily the right signals. And the reason that they weren't the right signals is, well, first of all, they weren't third-party referenced. So how do we know that that signal was actually true? Maybe the candidates made that signal up, and suddenly we're basing something on that, and we're making a decision based on that signal. So I think the signal quality piece is really interesting. we've got some things on the screen here, which I'll just touch on. So first of all, can we get signal quality or signals that are demonstrated? It's not just my word for it, but actually, how can we demonstrate that that signal is worth spending time on? So that might be, for example, a proof that I have a skill, or an example, or even me, for example, doing the job would be a signal. If you could give me a task and I did that task successfully for you, Jeff, then that would be a good signal, right? Same with behaviors. If I demonstrated to you on this call certain behaviors, they would be perfect signals. They would be good quality signals. And the cool thing about the comparable one here is if you asked everyone on this call the same questions and they all answered those questions, you could then compare all their answers. So not only are you getting good quality signals, but you're able to compare the signals because you asked the same question each time. What's fun about all of these signals, so not really CV-based signals, not written signals, is that they're harder to fake. So for example, a conversation like this on video, pretty hard to fake. I could obviously read off a script, but you would know that if I was reading off a script, particularly if you asked certain questions that you knew weren't scriptable, or you asked me to do something on this call, like, for example, build a spreadsheet or something. So really, it's interesting when you think about signals. I tend to think of what the traditional signals were. So in the traditional hiring process, which involves CVs or application forms. And then in the new world, how can we move away from those traditional signals into signals moving forward, which are actually, again, demonstrated, authentic, behavioral, comparable, and hard to fake. And it's a really interesting transition, because if we don't do that, then we're going to be in a difficult position. How can you take all these applications and actually do anything with them? We need signals to actually really kind of look for, identify, and then action on.
Okay, I'm going to hand this one over to you, but I think this is a really big question here around human judgment, right? Because now we have AI, and the last thing that we want is for AI to handle the entire process from start to finish, because then the human gets sort of knocked out of it. And so maybe you want to comment on that.
Yeah, so interesting one. Here's the fun example. You could today go into ChatGPT and you could say, highlight the top 10% of candidates in my CV pool. And I could upload 100 CVs and I could just ask ChatGPT that question. And it would actually do that. It would give me the top 10% of candidates, but it would only give me the top 10% of candidates based on what it thinks is a good looking or sounding candidate. And we all know that every single company's needs and wants and requirements are different. But ChatGPT doesn't know that. The person hiring does. I know, for example, what's the team that I'm trying to fit this person into? This, for example, this salesperson. What's the team that they're going into like? What's the culture of that team? What's the gap in that team that they need? Maybe it's a team full of introverts and we want an extrovert. ChatGPT doesn't know that. Or what if it's, we need somebody that's experienced in selling a specific type of software, some healthcare software, for example. Again, ChatGPT doesn't know that specific niche requirement that we have. There's so much context that's missing that you can't just rely on generic AI systems. You need that context, and the context is typically sitting within the recruiter's head and sometimes the hiring manager's head. And to get that context out is actually really difficult, because a lot of the context we don't think about. We just think because we know the team or we know the hiring manager, we know there's specific things that they need, specific requirements they need. We don't write them down. There's nowhere to write them down. We just know them in our heads. And that's why humans are so good at hiring, and that's why humans still do hiring, because there's just so much context that we need. So the interesting thing for me here is that yes, you could do it, but it would be a terrible outcome. It'd be a rubbish outcome for you as an organization. You would get some 10% of candidates, you would get that, you could spend time interviewing them all, but it would look the same as if Jeff ran the same ChatGPT prompt on the same pool of candidates. It would be the same top 10%. But both of our companies are different, and both of our needs and wants and requirements are different. And we end up with a poor outcome. I think it's interesting, and it just reinforces why the human is so important in the loop. The human, the hiring manager, the TA has all the context. We have all the context. We have all of this sort of potentially the bit that you can't articulate is obviously in our heads, and that's the beauty of what we're talking about here. There's things that systems can do, and then there's things that humans can do. And if we work together, then we're a much better outcome. And maybe I'm jumping ahead.
You are, but that's okay. That's all good. So I selected one more poll, and then we will segue right into the actual solution as to what we can possibly do about this. So let me just launch it quickly. And the question is, where are your weakest signals today? Once again, you have to go to the top, right, I believe. So the answers are the application stage, screening stage, the interviews, or the final outcome, decision. So where are your weakest signals today? So far, it's in the first two, application stage and screening stage, which is not shocking. Okay. We'll just go for a couple of minutes, or just a minute more here. So there have been a couple of questions popping into the Q&A, which is great. So we'll get to go to those questions towards the end. And if you have any comments, obviously just chime them in on the comment section. So once again, they're all in the application stage or screening stage. And so that makes sense. Thank you for that. It's a 9. I think for the next webinar, I'm going to use a different platform because they keep changing how this looks. So apologize. So let's move on to what do we do about it? As all of you know, this is what I like to do, talking about the solution. So let's move forward with this part. Really, I think the first part of it, and I'll talk about this, is about the mindset of reframe. And I think, I've been in the HR talent world for over 25 years. So obviously when you've been in that for that long, and habits form, perspectives, start to get entrenched. And so I think one of the first things is that the hiring success needs to be measured by confidence in the outcomes, not speed through the stages. I know that people like to measure time to hire, and I think that is a valid metric, but I think we need to be looking at your overall confidence in the outcomes, your hiring outcomes. That's the first thing. I think the other, just sort of aligned to that, is faster hiring outcomes with weak signal will create downstream issues. I'll give you an example. So many years ago, I was hiring an application security consultant, white hat hacker. So we knew that this was a wrong hire to make. They needed to hire someone quickly, and it created a whole bunch of issues, later on, culture, and then, I ended up firing this person 8 months later. And, that was an obvious one, but that can happen quite a bit. That is not so obvious. Okay, so I just wanted to just mention that as a mindset shift. Now we're going to get into the actual model. I'm going to pass it over to Euan. So this is a really important session. Euan, take it away.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I'll try and not relate it too much to Willo, but just more generic, so that we can sort of relate it to our hiring processes that we have at the moment. The everything really starts with the application. So a lot of people voted for the application stage here, where the signals maybe are lacking most. The first point here around early meaningful signals really kind of talks to that. How can we get early meaningful signals in our application forms would be a great place to start. So asking the right questions at the very start. Again, we're sort of trying to address the volume here, because over the years, many of us have been told to optimize the application form. And when we say optimize, we typically mean removing things, trying to remove questions from the application form to make it easier to apply. That may be changing. We might have to change that. And one way of changing that is by adding in good questions to the application form, so that we get good early signals from the application form. Then the next one here is, once we have those early meaningful signals, at what point are we actually going to introduce a human to the loop here? So we have, if we imagine our hiring funnel, and we have signals throughout the funnel, different signals, we have at the very top some really meaningful signals. And I mean like really high leveraging signals. So for example, if we're hiring for, say, a nurse needs a nursing degree. Let's ask whether they have a nursing degree in the application form. There's no point asking for that further down the funnel. Let's ask for that at the very top. Get those meaningful signals at the very top, so that our funnel starts to shrink, but immediately the funnel isn't full of people that don't have degrees that can't do the role in the first place. And then if we have a narrower funnel, we can then introduce a human earlier in the funnel, because the funnel is narrower. And I think that's a really important point here. We're going to have to accept that we're going to have fewer applications in our hiring process. But as you mentioned way earlier in this slide deck, volume doesn't equal good hiring. We don't need crazy volumes to be successful at hiring. We just need the right people in the process. I mean, you could literally say, I want one candidate to go in the top of my funnel, and I want to hire that candidate. That would be like the dream. That's where we want to get to, like one in, one out. Let's start with like less in the top so we can get that one out at the bottom. So next one here is verification moments. I really like this one because it's very lacking in most of our hiring processes. But at what point are we going to verify these things? So whatever that person says, whether it's I have a nursing degree or it's I have 10 years of experience in sales, at what point are we going to verify these things? Because at the moment, what I'm seeing is a lot of people are leaving the verification to the very end, typically when they've made the offer, which is really painful because that means you've gone all the way through the funnel. You spent all that time and then you've got that one person at the end. Then you do your verification checks, your background checks, your criminal ID checks, or even your educational background checks. And then you realize they didn't have the thing that they said they had. And then we have to go all the way back to the top and then start again. So verification should be higher up in the funnel. So we have a slightly narrower funnel. We have humans in the funnel, and then we put in verification points. Let's check their degree that they said they had. Let's check their diploma they had. Let's check that they went to that university. Let's do a background check earlier. Let's not wait till the very end. And then if we do all of that with a narrower funnel, we can make confident decisions because we know that we have at the very bottom of this funnel the right people. We've asked them really good questions at the top. We've checked who they are, what they say they are, with verifiable third-party data sources. And then we have a smaller pool at the bottom, but we can spend time on that pool because we know that that pool is right and it's worth investing time on. So that's kind of alludes to trust. The whole thing is about trust. Let's have a funnel full of trust. At the moment, many of us on this call and many of us just in general around the world have a funnel that's not full of trust. It's full of candidates that don't have degrees. It's full of candidates that said this, that said that can't work in the country that we want to hire in. There's just a bunch of stuff in that funnel that we don't need. And on the surface of it, it looks great because volume obviously looks good, but it's not the reality that we're facing in 2026.
Okay, now so if we can go through each of the different sessions, that would be great. So we talked about some, I gave overviews stuff you can go deeper into each.
Yeah, of course. So let's start with the definition. So let me think, again, not using Willo as an example, but if we were just to say early meaningful signals, and we are looking for things like, so let's use the nursing example again, and somebody trying to join there, I'll just close that. An example might be for this case, show us evidence of your nursing degree. And that's a perfect question to ask. We should ask that earlier. Hardly any of us, hardly any of the customers we speak to, or just anyone in general, is asking for that upfront. They're asking for that much further down. Then let's ask for examples as well of these signals. So if we're, for example, they're saying the candidate's referencing that they're a problem solver, give us examples. Give us examples of when you solved problems, and give me those examples on video or on an audio call. And then finally, let me evidence those. Can I actually get evidence of those? Can I speak to your previous employer, or can I see evidence of that? Have you got like a project that you can show me, or have you got an outcome that you can show me? Is there some sort of referenceable, verifiable data point that I can hang my hat on and say that's actually true? That's a true signal. And finally, explanation. Can we, for example, going back to the nursing one, can we reference that and can we give that to the hiring manager as well? So this is something that I find quite interesting. If you put yourself in the shoes of the hiring manager today, wouldn't it be nice if you could say to the hiring manager, they have the nursing degree, they've shown us examples of problem solving, and here's all of the data that backs that up. That's where I would love for us all to get to. So it's almost like, there's only 3 candidates or 2 candidates, but they're both verified and this is all of their credentials. That's way better than giving a hiring manager 10 or 20 applications with none of that. So this is, I guess, what we're talking about when we're talking about these meaningful signals. Obviously, the kind of outcome here is happy hiring managers. It's hiring managers that have the data that they need at their fingertips to make these decisions more quickly for us. And a lot of that just comes from getting these meaningful signals. At the moment, when we think about it again, let's throw our minds back to the traditional hiring process. Many of us are just giving our hiring managers a small stack of resumes or CVs and saying, review these candidates. But the hiring manager hasn't got any signals. They haven't got any signals worth spending time on. And we haven't given them any signals worth spending time on. But we can. And we should. I like this one. So human insights. What we're talking about here is let's think about where the human is actually jumping into the process. And again, if we think back to my example earlier with those 15 people doing interviews every single day, that wasn't the best use of those people's time. But it can be a good use of time if we put it at the right place. And what I would suggest we do is with a smaller hiring funnel, let's try and speak to everyone. Let's let's half the size of our funnel by asking the very right questions at the top so that our funnel is narrowed by half. And then let's actually allocate humans to do a second stage interview for every single person in that funnel. That would be a great place to get to, but at the moment it's unrealistic because the volumes are too high. So getting humans in at the right point, and actually, obviously, we've spoken about this on other podcasts I did last year. Humans are amazing at getting human signals from other humans, right? We have a great built-in sense of being able to read people and understand what they're saying or what they're getting at. We're great at reading a room. And we can tell, for example, when we start speaking to somebody about a specific topic, whether they really have a really good, deep understanding of that topic, or whether they're just surface level reading about it, or they're reading off a script. So I think there's a place for humans because of the things that humans can bring, but it needs to be at the right point. There's no point just throwing 15 recruiters at interviews all day long. That's not going to result in anything positive. But if we can bring these recruiters in at the right point, they will have a much better outcome. Verification moments I love, and you'll hear a lot about that in 2026. We at Willo, for example, are building an entire verified module, and that will allow you to run third-party data sourced reference points for your candidates. So candidates at the moment, when they enter your hiring process, like I said earlier, you're doing verification checks, background checks, screening checks, reference checks at the end of the hiring process typically, or quite near the end at the offer stage. That's fine, but it's a real pain when they fail those checks. Let's move those checks further up the process. Let's do them earlier on so we have better signals earlier. And hiring managers, again, would love that. What's the point in giving a hiring manager somebody that doesn't have right to work in the country that you're hiring in, for example? And that happens all the time. And then hiring managers start to lose confidence. And then when hiring managers lose confidence, the whole hiring process starts to lose its credibility as well. So let's verify earlier. Verification moments. My favorite ones really are things like right to work. So that's a really easy one to do, but it's often overlooked. Let's do right to work earlier. It's so easy to do. The other one that I love is reference checks. So again, reference checks rarely happen in 2025, and they rarely happen in 2026 because of volume. Also, our teams are so busy, we don't have time to do reference checks properly, and we just give up and we don't do them properly. So again, doing reference checks earlier, great if you can do it. We'll talk about how you do that with technology in a second, and with things like Willo. Other ones are education and background checks. We can do background checks, again, very easily with the right technology, and we can do education reference checks really easily too with colleges and universities around the world. If you can do those things, plus a whole bunch of other verification checks that we're bringing in with Willo Verified, you can much earlier decide, is it even worth spending time on Jeff's application form, or can he just not work in the country that we're hiring for? Or does he not have the right to work or the diploma that he said he had? So really important that we get the verification checks further up the process in 2026. And then finally here, if we do all of those things, we can make more confident decisions. And confidence, like I said earlier, comes from hiring managers, and it also comes from candidates. If hiring managers feel like they're getting a small but very verified, credible pool of candidates, and candidates feel like they're getting seen for all the right reasons and asked all the right questions, everyone's confidence goes up. And when you make confident decisions and when you have a confident hiring process, you're more likely to have better outcomes. At the moment, confidence is quite low in a lot of organizations that I speak to. Confidence is low because of all the things we spoke about at the start of the call. But if we can do a lot of these signals earlier on, and we can narrow that pool, we don't need all those applications, then we can have much better confident decisions, which means better outcomes for everyone. Early signals at scale. And this is very much a kind of a new thing, I would say. We've been speaking to customers about this for the past 2 or 3 years now, and this is ask questions consistently of candidates. So when you ask consistent questions, you get consistent answers. And when you get consistent answers, you can compare and contrast much easier. And one of my favorite changes that we've seen over the past few years is don't just ask questions that get written answers. Ask questions that get demonstratable answers. So that is, for example, a good one, maybe build me a spreadsheet for an accountant, build me a spreadsheet that we can use for basic P&L. Or for another example, actually with a customer, they're hiring crane drivers. And their question was literally, go and show us how you would drive that crane, how you would do the job, basically. How much more fun is that, and how much better is that? If I asked you, Jeff, to go and drive a crane, you wouldn't be able to drive the crane probably, and I would know straight away you weren't the hire for me. And whereas I could go and ask someone else, go and drive me that crane, if they knew how to drive a crane and they did it properly, I would know pretty early that that was the right thing to do. And so asking the right questions, demonstratable questions, actually show that people can do the jobs much better than previous questions, much better than relying on a CV. And like I said here as well, real world scenarios, give them real challenges or problems that your organization faces or that this role is supposed to solve. And if you can do those, and you can do those with technology, for example, like using Willo. If you use Willo, you can ask them to solve a spreadsheet problem. You can ask them to do a recording of driving a crane. There's so many amazing examples that you can capture on video or you can capture on screen share of people actually doing these roles.
Yeah, I don't think you want me driving a crane, but anyway.
Signal. So this is a great, I guess, 2026 challenge for us all is what do we automate versus what do we protect? And automation is fantastic for things like repetition. So when I say ask the same questions over and over again, let's automate that. You don't need to ask the same questions over and over again. Use a system, use an application form that has the same questions in it. Use a Willo that asks the same questions over and over again. You'll get consistency as well. And then let's also use sorting. Let's automate the sorting completely. We don't need to, for example, look at all of the applications at the top of the funnel and manually take people out that said they didn't have the degree that we need for the nursing role. Let's just use automation and do that part automatically. It doesn't need any intelligence. There's no smart stuff going on there. If they have the degree and they say yes, then they pass through. And if they say no, they automatically get moved out. But then on the other side of the equation, what do we protect? What do we actually keep as a human part of the role? What are we doing here in 2026? And what's worth protecting? And the first one on the list here really is the most important one, is that judgment. If we have all the data at our fingertips, we have all these fantastic signals, let's use all those data points and all those fantastic signals as humans to make a really good judgment on who we should progress to the next stage. And the other one here is context. Let's protect the context. I spoke about that earlier. We as humans know all of the context. We have all the context as to what the organization is looking for, what the hiring manager is looking for, what the team needs at this given moment in time, and when they need it as well, and who they need for that role. So we have a huge amount of context typically locked up in here that we can continue to rely on. But if we look at this, I think it's a fantastic challenge for us all in 2026, is to try and achieve this balance of automation versus human interaction. And if we get a nice balance, we'll have a much better, more happy work-life balance. Where certain things are just automated out because they never needed to be done. And then on the other side, we get to do more of what we like doing, more of the human interaction piece. And then when we do all of that, how does 2026 look? Well, should be less noise. Less noise in 2026 would be fantastic for all of us. And less noise typically means less of those applications at the very top of the funnel that never had the things that we needed anyway. We can have better conversations further down the funnel because there's less people in the funnel. We'll have a higher confidence from our hiring managers typically, but also a higher confidence in our own pool of candidates. And ultimately, we'll make better, fairer decisions because we're basing our decisions on verified, credifiable, accurate data points.
Okay. So we only have about 9 minutes left. So I want to just quickly go through this because I want to get to questions. I think that's really important. So what? I mean, so I think we've already talked about, all of this stuff here. I think many of you know me that I've been calling for the change in terms of how we view a resume. And so we need to somehow figure out a way how to stop over-trusting resumes. And I think the second one is around screening. And so what typically happens when the volume increases, I think our first instinct is lucky to screen harder. And that just, creates a whole issue of some workload, fatigue, lost credibility of, outcomes and so on. And I think the last one, measuring speed over confidence. So we mentioned this a couple of times, right? So the idea is yes, it's still important to measure some time constraints, I guess, to hire. But I think where we're going now because of the shift with, how things are going is confidence. And so if you can mix that into it, I think that will result in a better hiring outcome every single time. And so, once again, just to rethink how you go about that, the signal order. And so really trying to, move away from over relying on resume, making sure that you're intentionally inserting human value into the process, and then really making sure that the trust is there. So, and trust, so what I mean by that is through candidates, recruiters, hiring managers, really making sure that trust they fully trust, the entire process. And I just wanted to just mention that. Just a question for you to think about, take away. If resumes stop working tomorrow, what would they replace them? I think that's probably a really good way to kind of frame that whole topic. And I just want to leave that sort of with you. And so if you have a chance, I'm going to share this tomorrow anyways. Willo has a fantastic hiring trends report. With the QR code, you can scan it now. You can access it. I will also share it tomorrow in the post webinar email as well. So, I read it already. It's fantastic. So I think you'll find value from reading it and then sharing it with your peers. Yeah. And also, so key takeaway, hiring hasn't lost its human core, and that always will still be there. So we need to be intentional where the humans show up, not be over reliant on systems, AI, automation, and the resume. Okay, I want to get to your questions. So we had a couple of questions here. Hold them up. And if anybody has any other questions, they can chime in. So the first question from Anita, if the team wants to validate authenticity earlier without adding friction, what's the smallest change you've seen make the biggest difference? And what should they stop relying on first? Euan, did you want to take that away?
A two-part question. Let me see. I'll probably start with what they should stop relying on first. What we should probably stop relying on first is asking for CVs and resumes. That would be where I would start. Stop asking for them, you'll stop getting them. And then you'll have to think about that question that you said earlier, which is, if resumes stop working tomorrow, what would we do? Well, if we didn't have them in our process, we would find out pretty quickly what we would do, because we would have to rely on something else. So that'd be my answer to the first part, is don't ask for the thing that we don't want anymore. And then second part would be, what's the smallest change you've seen to make the biggest difference? And the smallest change I've seen is probably, I think about it, I mean, there's so many interesting examples that we get from customers, but the smallest change that I've seen is probably to introduce something like a Willo, so a screening stage earlier in the process. So whereas a lot of hiring processes say, send us a CV, and that kickstarts the process, you could, and this is a nice way of doing it, you could ask for more upfront. You might say, hey, that's going to add friction, we're going to have less candidates. But going back to what we said earlier, we don't want all of the candidates in the world to apply to our role anyway, because there's too many and we can't do anything with them. So let's ask more specific questions, more detailed questions earlier in the process. And that can be with a Willo, it can be with a more detailed application form, wherever it happens to be. But if you ask specific questions earlier that are relevant to the role, we'll have less candidates, but more qualified candidates for the role. So that'd be my small changes. But definitely stop asking for the CVs and the resumes would be a great place to start.
Yeah, I think many years ago, Zappos actually started to, they came up with a blanket policy, no resume. And that was about 10 years ago. And so what that uncovered actually was better signal quality. So they were actually really early on. And I think they kept that policy over time. Second question, Euan, wondering if the problem's weak input, not bad tools, what should hiring teams actually prioritize when evaluating the hiring staff and providing signals?
Good question from Anonymous. Let's see. So if the problem is weak inputs, not bad tools, what should we be prioritizing? And I guess it probably does start with something around tools, to be honest. A lot of our tech stacks aren't actually fit for purpose. A lot of tech stacks I'm seeing, a lot of people on this call probably agree, they don't like their ATS. They don't really like that tech stack that they inherited. It probably does start with the tech stack. That's a really good place to start. Getting the tech stack right will obviously streamline your candidate journey, but it'll also help you streamline the whole funnel that we spoke about earlier. If you can actually use a tech stack that allows you to build a funnel, then you're in a much better place. So I would say to Anonymous, it does actually start with the tools. Using the right tools is a great place to start. There's so many tools out there that are just not fit for purpose. Tools, for example, that make you sign up for an account before you even submit an application form. And your application form is like name, email address, phone number, and a resume upload. Those systems are so broken. They're not going to help anyone to make a good decision. So that's probably a good place to start, would be tools. Let's reassess all of your tools. Go for tools that are modern, forward-thinking, streamlined, importantly, and simple would be another good one here. Lots of ATSs are very overcomplicated and overcomplicate the process for both candidates and recruiters.
Fantastic. So we have a good question here from Jillian. So we'll take one more question. Just a follow-up to the suggestion. I'm asking more detailed questions up front. She's asking, are you also suggesting changing the actual format? For example, video to respond versus just written exercises versus written response.
I love this question. I think it's a really good question, and I have a good answer, I hope, for you all. My suggestion here, Gillian, is just give the candidates the choice. So best way to implement something like this, because it's a big change for a lot of organizations, is to start with a video format and a CV format and let the candidates vote. If the candidates start to migrate to the video format, then you're onto something. And if the candidates coming through the video format are, resulting in more hires, then perfect. And if that's not working, then why don't you change it to a demonstrable exercise or change it to a written response? There's not like a one size fits all answer here. But what I would suggest you do is allow the candidates to vote in their numbers. If they go through a certain path and it's successful, then you're onto something. And if they go through that path and it's not successful, change it. Because you've got some great examples here: video response, written response, demonstrable exercise. They're all really good solutions, and they are all good solutions for different organizations and for different job roles. But there isn't like a one size fits all, unfortunately. So I would just say try different, alternate them and see which one works, would be my suggestion. And Willo is obviously a great solution for a lot of these, because we do a lot of these in different variations. You can do video, you can do audio, you can do text, and you can just see what works. And that's the fun thing about tech and hiring, is that you can do a lot of A/B testing and you can split test and you can see which one works.
Fantastic. So thank you, everybody, for those questions. Just very, very quickly, we're going to send a follow-up note tomorrow with the recording, as well as any other link to the report from Willo. Just to remind you all that the next webinar is on February 26th. We'll be doing it with Checkmate, which is an Australian background check company. And this one's going to be all about, AI and background screening, which is actually pretty good topics. If you want to register for it, go to ScaleHR.com/events. And so all of our other webinars are also on there as well. Get a hold of Euan at willo.video. Put it all in email tomorrow as well. So thank you, Euan, for being here. Great to have you here. Share your expertise, obviously. And everyone, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Have a great day.